Hey, it's Nate, and welcome back to another episode of the Redeemed Man podcast. Today, I'm so excited to have Jamie Bambrick on our podcast. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Great to be with you.
Jamie is a pastor at Hope Church in Northern Ireland, overseeing small groups, volunteer teams, newcomer support, and outreach. As it sounds like most pastors, a lot on his plate. He's been married to Danny since 2011, and they have two full of energy boys, and he loves watching American football and is actually our first international guest on the Redeemed Man podcast. So, Jamie, we're excited to have you.
Nice. I'm excited to be here. Actually, American football, sorry. I'll start on that. The first team that I got into watching, because we were just chatting a little bit about Church of the Highlands, was Alabama. Got me into it. It was actually college football where I started, and I was on a flight from Atlanta to Birmingham, and Alabama were playing LSU, and okay. Derrick Henry was the running back at the time,
yes.
And he destroyed everyone. It was amazing, and I was just immediately hooked. So there you go. There's a little bit of backstory in that regard.
Jamie, I don't know if you're that familiar with football, but I'm for the other team in Alabama. So you just brought up Alabama.
Right.
And I went to Auburn University.
Right. Yeah,
so for me, I'm a big Auburn fan, but I can appreciate Auburn has some amazing football teams. This past year, actually, we spent a lot of time watching NFL, which would be something that we talk a little bit about with one of your YouTube videos. But my team's the Cowboys, which was kind of a heartbreaker. They had it look like a good run, and then it just kind of disappeared at the end.
Yeah, I have some friends who are Cowboys fans over here. Actually, they're one of the more supported teams in Northern Ireland. And that was. I wasn't surprised. I'm going to be honest. The Cowboys, they once it hits the playoffs, it just falls apart.
Yes, it's a little bit, honestly, living here in Georgia, like some of our teams, we struggle occasionally with the Braves and the Falcons are the same things. We get our hopes up, and then there at the end, it seems like the wheels fall off the train. So,
yeah.
Well, Jamie, you're a YouTube content creator as well as a pastor, and you're sharing videos now, trying to share 26 quality videos this year in 2024. What's it like sharing videos and content and growing and interacting with an audience in an online forum?
Yeah, it's actually been a lot of fun. I started this. I'd had the idea for quite some time. I'd probably wanted to do it for a couple of years before starting. And one of the main things that actually stopped me was I don't want to just live online. I don't want to just do that, because I like real people. So, flesh and blood matters. And so at that point, I was actually not in my background is in pastoral ministry, but I wasn't in a ministry role at that point. I'd stepped out of where we were, and then we were waiting for something to open up. And so it was only whenever I got into pastoral ministry that I then felt I could actually do the online thing. But it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun in a whole bunch of ways. Obviously, it's nice when you have a video that does well and reaches people, and that's exciting. Part of the fun has also been just connecting with people all over the place. I feel like I have a whole bunch of new friends around the world, people I've got to know and do little bits of work with, or just built some friendships with through Twitter or various other ways people have interacted, and that's been really fun actually. And then obviously trying to see some fruit from that. And when I got excited was when I started to hear people locally were actually watching and being impacted by the videos, getting moved either towards faith or further on in their faith as a result of it. Because I know if that's happening locally, then perhaps other people elsewhere are experiencing the same thing. And so, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, you're very witty, and I love in your videos you often use clips from movies and advertisements and memes and all kinds of different things, and it's very fun, and you have a lot of fun with it, even though on sometimes very hard conversations and topics. So great work that you're doing. You grew up there in Northern Ireland, so you have a heart for the people there in your area. Can you talk a little bit about how you grew up and how you came to know Christ?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian context here, in a great church here in Northern Ireland that I'm very thankful for, and Christian family, and again, a very good and supportive family throughout. And sometimes people sort of think that that's not an exciting testimony, and perhaps it's not as dramatic as some some testimonies, and every testimony is I think good in its own right. But I'm very thankful for having come up in that background, because I know that if I didn't grow up in that background, there's a good chance I wouldn't be a Christian today, and so that's such a blessing. I had, like most teenagers, that period where you're sort of wobbly at best, potentially not even really walking with the Lord. And I always claimed to have a faith and would have attended church. But I remember having a moment once where there were a couple of key things that I think really cemented that walk with God and brought that to be a real personal faith for me. One of them was actually a sense of conviction. So someone shared a word with me, and they had felt led by God to share something, and it started a real period of wrestling in my own heart about where I was with God, and really deciding, was I going to run from God or run to God? And I didn't really come to a conclusion on that for some time. It was a few months really of walking through that period. And then I remember once I was in a worship event. We were at a sort of a Christian youth festival here in Northern Ireland, and there's a few thousand young people there. And I saw one of my friends with his hands lifted in worship, and we were what I would describe as church cool, so not actually cool, like not objectively cool, but in the church circle we were the cool group, and lifting one's hands wasn't what the cool kids did. But I remember seeing him and just seeing that he had a genuine love for God and a real sense of wanting the same thing for myself. I just saw that he had a real connection with God. Did a little, it's not quite on camera, one of those, subtle hand lifts, that was the step. And immediately sensed God's presence in a way that I never had before. Went to the full double-hander, lifter-upper after that. And just that was it, It was like God just moved in my life. I knew that it went from God being an idea to God being a personal reality for me. And I've had a long journey since then, and I was 17 years old, 16 years old actually, and that's almost 20 years ago now, which is scary to think about. But that was probably one of my key moments, and coming out from a background like that was very beneficial to me walking with the Lord today.
And then calling, how did you step into calling for ministry? You had that encounter with the Lord at 16 where you really developed a personal relationship and began to pursue Christ. But then that journey into pastoral ministry is a big call, and it is depending on the context, can be cool or not so cool.
Right. Yeah. It probably wasn't cool at that point for us. At least I didn't consider it as such. It was about a year later after that moment with God. I really felt that I wanted something more of God. I didn't know what it was. I knew I was walking with the Lord, but I knew there was a sense of, no, there's more to this. And we were having, again, I think youth events are great. We were having a youth event in our church. It was going to be a little sort of mini conference. I think it was a Friday and Saturday kind of thing. And I remember the week before just committing to pray for an hour a day in the build up to that, trusting that God would in some way move in my life. I didn't even know what I was searching for. There was something, just a yearning for more of God. And on the final evening of that, just had another encounter with the presence of God. That was pretty dramatic for me. And from that point on, I just started talking about God to everybody. It was just this sort of very natural overflow. And people kept saying to me, I think you're called to ministry. And every time they said that, I was, in my heart, I was like, yes, I am. Like, I feel that's what I'm meant to do. And I don't know what your audience will think about gifts of the Spirit, but I had a few people who didn't know me that were praying and had words for me around that time. There was a whole bunch in a very short period of people saying, no, you're called to preach, you're called to pastoral ministry, you're called to teach the Word of God. And so that was it from that point on. So since 17 years old, that was what I wanted to do. So I had my final year of school after that. I'm going to be honest, I didn't do a lot of classwork. I just wanted to read my Bible. I decided if I was going to Bible college, I didn't need to do mathematics anymore.
Yes.
So I stopped doing that, and I've since unlearned everything that I learned throughout school. I can barely add at this point. But which may not have been that wise, I'm going to be honest, wouldn't be my recommendation, but it was what I did. I was very passionate about going after this, and then ended up going out to Bible college in Sweden, actually, interestingly. That's a whole other long story in itself. But that was key to that, and getting sort of more equipped to actually do what I believe I was called to do, and have ended up doing since.
And you're currently ministering in Anglican context, correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll kind of turn around and revisit a little bit what it's like ministering there in your local context. But I would love to know, we ask all of our guests what redemption means to you personally, because everyone has a different description. Some's very theological, some's very personal. But we love to focus on the fact, because for us, the redeemed, it's all about people having that encounter with Christ, and whether it was, early on in their life and they understood that redemption, or it's they lived a life sowing a lot of seed that they're not very proud of, and yet God is redeeming that. So, Jamie, what does redemption mean for you?
Great question. Love it. I think for me, so having grown up in what was a healthy context, I didn't grow up somewhere where it was violence and drugs. That wasn't part of my, background or life. And so as I said, I don't have one of those dramatic testimonies. What I can see is the trajectory of where my life would have gone had God not intervened, if I had gone my own way, because sin always takes you further than you want it to take you.
No doubt.
And you always end up paying more than you want to pay, and all of those, keeps you longer than you want to stay, all of that classic preacher line, cost you more than you want to pay and keep you longer than you want to stay. And I know the direction that I would have went. I had a good start, but if it hadn't been for God, I could have ended up in a very dark place, and I would have, in those teenage years, and some of that's teenage angst, but it would have been a degree of depression and stuff like that as well, right? And now I can say that I'm thankfully very free and living with a lot of joy in my life. Various other, you have all your classic teenage, sins and all of that stuff, and you just go, well, if without the grace of God, where would that take you? And so for me, I look at a life where God intervened at a moment that was probably actually very important for it not going in a direction like that, and has been really, really blessed as a result. So I ended up, as I said, I went out to Bible college. I met my wife out there. We've now got these boys, working with people here that I'm now great friends with, and just really thankful to God of not the redemption from some terrible life, but a life that could have gone in a bad direction, and without him would have gone in a bad direction. I have no doubt about it. So really thankful that he intervened at that moment to save me from that kind of pain and heartache that would have been.
Jamie, I think, like you said, some people can see that say that it's not a very powerful testimony, and yet I think it is a great testimony of God's keeping nature, of protecting us, and I think everyone's story is so different and unique. And if at the end of the day, if it's protection from something, or if it's an overcoming of something major, it's a really a proclamation of the goodness of God, and that God, protected you in those seasons. Obviously, I know that even though you have not had any kind of crazy story or struggle in your life, you've faced challenges. So in the context of your life, what has been one of the hardest things for you to navigate and deal with? Was it a season that you were facing of emotional challenge, or a dynamic of trying to decide what was next in pastoral ministry? I would love to know what's been one of the challenges that you've faced that has really stretched you a lot.
Yeah, there's a few I could go into. I think probably the one that is most that we've been really blessed by, and people will know the end of the story because we've already mentioned it. But we struggled to conceive. We struggled for a few years, and we were told that we were unlikely to to conceive naturally. And so we were praying about that, and we were looking at the options, and thinking about IVF. I didn't really know anything about it, and we felt we shouldn't do that. Was what we felt. And I'm not there to make a decision for other people, right? But we felt we shouldn't, and so I remember once I was reading my Bible. I wasn't even thinking about it. I say I was reading my Bible. My Bible was open, and I was not paying attention. I was doing my due diligence, right, where you skim read and you say you've done it at the end of the day, one of those. And I felt convicted by the Lord, actually, to go back and reread. And it was Genesis 18, and it's that moment. And I'm not saying that you should read the Bible in an interpretive way in this fashion, but I think God often does speak to you personally through verses like that. And it was that moment where God says to Abraham, this time next year I'm going to visit you and you shall have a son. And so that was January of, I'm going to mess up the years now, because January of 2017. January 2017. And we thought, well, I shared it with my wife. I said, I think this, and she probably had more faith than I did, actually. Yeah. So then we got to like April time, when you would expect to maybe, okay, we'll hear something, and nothing happened. I said, well, maybe we were wrong, and my wife was like, no, I think we'll within a year we'll know that we're having a baby. And so it got to. I had totally forgotten about it, to be honest. Like I hadn't held on to it at all. Yeah. I wasn't sitting thinking about it. But I remember it was the January 2018, the 31st of January 2018. So it was the same month that we found out we were having a baby, and we knew it was going to be a boy at that point, right? It was like, yeah, this has to be a boy, like if that's the word. So his middle name's Isaac. Which is after that. So yeah, just really thankful to God. And then actually, as far as we know, the same issues were the same issues, right? Yeah. But our son was very passionate about having a baby brother or sister. We remember him having this period of crying, actually, and being like, I really want a brother or sister. So I remember encouraging him, just going, I'll just pray for it. It was like a few months where he just felt really burdened for it for some reason. And then we found out again in January, actually, not that had a word to God to do with it, but we found out we were going to have a baby. We hadn't told him, and my wife wasn't showing. But one morning he walked in, he was playing with us. He was 3 years old at that point, and he pointed at my wife's stomach and said, "There's a baby in there," and started talking to the baby without him knowing at all or even showing. It was just something God, it's a testimony for him as well. So yeah. So that's been a real testimony of God's faithfulness, actually, through a difficult time. And I don't know what I did right. I can't say that I have a bunch of lessons in there. God did some good stuff, and we're thankful and living in the fruit of that.
Well, congratulations on being able to conceive and have those two sons that are such a picture of God's faithfulness to you and your wife. And I know it's a continual reminder. My wife and I have struggled with fertility as well, and understand what it's like, to navigate that space. And it's not easy on the wife or the husband, and it's different emotions. And but thank God for the children that you guys do have, and we're praying for anybody that's still walking through that struggle, because it is a real challenge that a lot of people face, and the results aren't always the same. But praise God for His faithfulness to see us through, no matter the circumstance or no matter the outcome. Jamie, as a pastor there in Northern Ireland, it's a different location than here in the southeast of the United States. I would love to hear a little bit about what God's doing in Hope Church, what you guys are learning in the relationship you have there with your pastoral team and the community that you're in, what you're seeing God do. Because I think in one of your videos on YouTube, and I couldn't agree more, God's doing a great work in the local church across so many different nations and locations. And so I want to hear about what's happening there and what you guys are seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, if you'd asked me this like a year ago, I would have said that we're in a really difficult season across the sort of UK-wide body of Christ. Yeah. We were sitting there, I was chatting with our senior pastor, And, it's like, it just seems really tough for everybody. And we, as a church, we felt like we were healthy and good. We weren't growing particularly, at any astounding rate. I mean, it's a relatively recently started church, and we'd got up to from 70 to a couple of hundred. We were kind of sitting around there. And, praise God for that. That's good growth. Most churches are not seeing that. And so we weren't complaining, but we were just observing that things felt very flat. And suddenly, just over the last literally 2.5 months, I mean, we've grown by 30% in the last 2.5 months. So we're up at anywhere over 270 up to, 260 up to 300 now, out of nowhere, having done nothing. We didn't do anything smart. We didn't do like a marketing strategy. We didn't do a big push. There was no building move. We've been doing the same thing. We've really sensed. I mean, we had a period of prayer and fasting in January, and we really felt like God shifted something there. There's been a real sense of the presence of God with us as a church, and then these people have just started showing up and encountering God in various ways, and some people come into faith within that as well, which is exciting. And I mean, we're obviously excited as a congregation for ourselves and what God's doing there. But I've suddenly started to hear a lot of reports from churches across the Western world that it just seems like the last few months there has been a real uptick in people showing up and people coming to church and a hunger for the things of God. And I'm talking from big churches right down to little small ones. My brother-in-law is a minister in the Church of England. He's a faithful, Bible-believing Christian within there, and in quite a difficult context. And they have a church plant in a very difficult part of England, in an Islamic area of a town near London. And even they have just said the last few months they've just had all these people start to come along. So I really think there is. Perhaps, you don't want to say definitely, and we need to see this borne out over a longer period of time, but I think we could be seeing the very start of the turn of something of a tide, because there's been so much talk about secularization, down, the decline of the church. But God can do what he likes. God can intervene in that. I don't think the culture's irredeemable. I think God actually has a plan for the Western Church, and I think his plan is not to lose. I think he actually has a better plan than that. So it's been exciting actually to see just a little sign of, okay, there's potential that this could be something bigger, particularly if it continues like that.
I know it has to be exciting as a local pastor in that context to see life change, to see people taking steps and experiencing Christ and understanding what it is to be in his presence and have the Holy Spirit move and fill people and lead people. What as a pastor do you enjoy the most? What really fuels you? Because I know, having served in the local church myself, there are things that when you're walking in that, that God's made you for this season and for that call. So can you share a little bit of what really excites you in the local church and what you get to do? Because I shared your bio, you have quite a responsibility.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're not a massive church, so you get those kind of I call it a miscellaneous pastor. It's just like you just do stuff, just make things happen, right? Which I enjoy, and I have no problem with that. And I'm quite sociable, so for me to have the opportunity to connect with people in a bunch of different ways, that's actually one of the things I do really enjoy. I have a role that allows me to connect with a lot of people in our church and get to know them and be sort of the main pastoral, not always, dealing with all the heavy issues, but just that first port of call for a lot of people if something's going on. I really enjoy that. Preaching is one of my, main passions as well. And I love getting to share the word of God, and do so with a congregation that actually, really are responsive. Our congregation are just they're really a blessing to minister to and with. They're the kind of people that are so supportive. See, some places you get feedback. It's whatever you said that they didn't like, they'll let you know pretty quickly. Whereas these guys are kind of the opposite. I mean, say the opposite. They're not undiscerning, right? But they are supportive, and openly and warmly supportive, and that's great. And then I love our prayer meetings. We run a midweek prayer meeting. We started that maybe just over a year ago. No, maybe it was a year ago. I think it was a year ago. And it's just grown and grown. We went from, so as I said, we were a couple hundred people. We started with 10 or so coming out to that. We regularly get 40,
Wow.
which,
That's
which
awesome.
so that's like a fifth of our church, showing up to the prayer meeting every week, which is just great. And the sense of, and it's not a sort of frozen chosen prayer meeting. People go for it. They're praying and they're interceding, and we're seeing God answer those prayers as well. I think we're part of why we're seeing what we're seeing. We believe anyway is the fruit of the things that we've been praying for, and we're starting to tick off some of those prayer answers. One of our challenges is building. There's potential that something could happen in that regard. We're getting excited. It hasn't happened all the way yet, but there's movement that we didn't think would happen, and so that's really exciting, actually. So yeah, those things of connecting with people. I love to preach. I particularly love to preach to our people, and I love our prayer meeting. Those are really good fun.
And you guys are close to Belfast, correct?
Right. Yeah. So I actually live in Belfast,
Okay.
and I travel down. So it's about 45 minutes from here, which is the other side of the world by Northern Irish standards, because that's halfway across the country. But it's actually not that long in reality. So we're about I'm the far side of Belfast. So you can get into Belfast about 25 minutes, 30 minutes if you need to from the church.
No, it definitely, my first time, I've not been to Ireland, but I did go to England and Scotland. And as an American, my first experience, I was like, holy smoke, this country, like I can be from one side to the other. Like just, it's so hard to get my mind around it coming from the context that I had grown up in. But love that area of the world. I think it's beautiful. I think, I know there's definitely some dreary days, but I think it's an absolutely stunning place. My undergrad degrees in horticulture, and so one of the things I loved about being in that area of the world is some of the most spectacular flower displays I've ever seen, because they do get plenty of water. And here in the South where I'm at, it gets really hot, and usually by the end of the summer they don't look very good. But when you're over there, I remember seeing hanging baskets that were like as large as like a table or a room, and I was like, holy smoke, this is amazing. So I love that aspect of that region of the world. And then I met my wife when she was in Germany, and so I got to spend some time in Europe then, and just really think it's probably one of the prettiest places at different cities. I love my time. I got to spend some time in London, and so I can imagine you live in a very beautiful place, but oftentimes too, it can be really hard and challenging with the weather and culturally. For us, I know when I was in Germany with my wife, coming from an area that's very Christian, there's negatives and positives. And I imagine you probably kind of experienced that there in the region that you're in Northern Ireland as well. And there's been conflict over faith in Ireland historically. And I know probably there's a little bit of that secularization that we were talking about that you can definitely see in the culture and society around you. But praise God for what he is doing in the local church.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Northern Ireland is probably more similar to, say, the Bible Belt than the rest of Western Europe would be. And part of that, I think, I mean, as you said, we've had our negatives here. Northern Ireland is known for the sort of Catholic Protestant conflict, right? But within that, obviously, we have a very, very different way of viewing that, and there's cultural Protestantism and cultural Catholicism, right, that exist. But within that, we do also have a good number of real believers, like percentage-wise. And it's one of the places in Europe, having lived in much more secular environments. So as I said, lived in Sweden. I've also lived in Cambridge, which would be one of the more liberal cities within the UK. I didn't study at Cambridge University. I just like to, just in case anybody thinks I'm that smart. Definitely not. But I did live there. Actually, I have two siblings that did go to Cambridge, so that definitely hangs over me as a failure on my part. Maybe one day. Anyway, but having seen that, Northern Ireland is quite blessed. Actually, I think we have a more of an opportunity here to push back on things. It's small and we're limited in a number of ways, but actually there's some good health. I've been recommending to English people that are Bible believing Christians to just move here. That's been my thing. It's like, just leave. We'll take you. So it's a warm place and friendly in a way that the southern states can be as well. In my experience, having been out there a couple of times. Yeah.
Well, we hope to welcome you back sometime. Shifting a little bit, Jamie, to your YouTube channel. That's really how I came to know about you and your ministry. During the Super Bowl this past year, there was the video that most everybody's familiar with that people had strong opinions about, with talking about Jesus and modeling washing different people's feet, and you kind of had a response of what you felt like was a better alternative to communicating the gospel. Can you talk a little bit about your video and how it went viral and what kind of response you got from that?
Sure, yeah. So the original video, I would put it down as a little bit of a missed opportunity. That's kind of been my take on it, which it seemed to... It conflated a few things. There were some things in it that were fine, and that were maybe bought in a little bit to some of the sort of slightly woke cultural tendencies. But some of those things, there's nothing innately wrong with some of them. But there was also some issues there where you'd go, well, the Bible says that's sin, and the implication of that original commercial, which I think most people will know of, is that Jesus' response to that would functionally be to kind of bless it, not say anything about it, and not call people out from sinful lifestyles. And the gospel is more than that. Of course, Jesus loves everybody. God is good to everybody. He causes the rain to fall and the sun to shine, and good and evil, right? So he's not. There's a degree of truth in that, but actually the world needs a little bit more than that. And so I recreated it with these people that have been saved out of a variety of lifestyles, from some that are more, that maybe have a slightly less, you could argue less politically or less culturally hot topic. So, a former gang member or a former atheist. I think people would, have no problem with that. But we also had within that someone who's formerly transgender, someone who's formerly living in a lesbian, working as a lesbian activist. Actually, that was kind of her she was a queer theory professor, something like that. Getting the title slightly wrong, but that was her job. And living that lifestyle, and how Jesus saves people from that, because that is what Jesus does. Jesus doesn't just bless us in our sin and say, there you go, thumbs up from me. He actually calls us out, and not just calls us out, but genuinely does deliver us from sin. Like that is something that he does, is that sin is not something you are supposed to just live in subjection to, or even something you're just to get forgiveness from. It actually is something you're to be set free from in this life. And we do so imperfectly, we do so gradually, we do so over time, right? So no claims of sinless perfection here. But it is amazing when you look at people who have been really bound up in sin and seeing how God has led them into lives that are fruitful and flourishing and free and just blessed by him in so many ways, and then using them to reach other people is just incredible. So that, I think, resonated with a lot of people, particularly believers, as being a more true representation of what we believe and what the gospel is. And so, it just happened to get crazy traction, and went for a few days, went all over the internet, and my notifications blew up, and that was slightly crazy. It was quite stressful, actually. It's one of those things you sort of obviously when you create content, you want it to do well,
Yeah.
right? But then when it does that well, you're like, oh wow, this is a lot of work. Don't know if I want to be this successful. But it was exciting, and it was great that it edified people. I had wonderful stories coming in. Some of the people that appeared in the video, because I had thought I was putting out a little video onto my channel, and maybe a few thousand people at best might watch it, as opposed to a few million. But the the people that were in it like got in touch and were thankful and praising God that he had used their testimonies in that way. And I had other people talking about them coming to faith or showing it to their non-Christian friends and them being in tears and stuff. So it was just one of those things you go, wow, that was really cool. And it was one of those things where you sort of go, I mean, it was definitely the easiest video I ever made. It was the least effort. It was maybe a nice idea, but it wasn't sort of difficult to execute. But God just took it and did something with it. That was a blessing to me, actually, as well as hopefully a lot of other people.
Well, it was great. It really was. And for me, I had seen, of course, the ad during the Super Bowl, and like you said, there were things that, well, it communicated well, and other things it seemed to fall short. But when I saw yours, I was like, man, this is so good. And I really did appreciate your approach to that, because you were not dishonoring to the creators. You tried to do your best, and how you talked about your video and some different things that I saw online, and I appreciated that, because I think one of the things that is sad to see is sometimes our church today, in the middle of trying to write the course sometimes for churches who've shifted away from the gospel, there is a divisive nature sometimes that comes about on the opposite side of that, to be right. And so I appreciated the way you handled that, but I really did love the stories of transformation. And like you said, the gospel is transformative. And just this past week, I interviewed a guy that we're releasing a podcast with, Joshua Broom, who was a former porn star who's now preaching. Like, it changed him. And that is really the gospel. The woman at the well, like it was somebody that society looked on and they were living a certain way. And I love the part that resonated the most with me is that was who we are, and not forgetting that as Christians, we're not better than, we've just been changed and transformed by the gospel and by the power of the work of Jesus in our life. And that I love so much about the video. But you have a lot of other videos out there, and you hit some pretty hot button issues. And I know in the platform that you're on, people tend to say some pretty harsh things online. How do you navigate the interactions you have, and trying to make sure the gospel stays first and foremost in your life, and that you don't get caught up in the negativity or the back and forth with different people?
Yeah, I probably made some mistakes in that regard historically. And one of the things I've probably broadly learned is I don't interact with negative comments, and it's not because sometimes someone can actually leave a comment that's constructive, like, oh, I disagreed, and they give some good points. That's fine. I have no problem with that. Sometimes you get something that's just blasting whatever you've said. And part of it is, I as you said, sometimes I can be witty. That can have its downsides, because you can feel then tempted to say something. And I have done historically, and sometimes that's okay, but I think generally it doesn't lead to much fruitful interaction of any sort. So I try and interact with the positive comments and interact with those as best I can. And I'm getting to the point now where there's too many comments to interact with them all, right? So I'll try and interact with a few. But because I'm also doing Twitter, and I'm a glutton for punishment, so I'm on Instagram as well now, just making my life just full of social media. But that's so I'll try and deal with the nice stuff, and not worry about the other stuff, because ultimately I don't think I'm that likely to really change someone's mind in the comments section, and it's not a good use of time, as far as I'm concerned, really, for them or me. I mean, we can sit and have an argument, But I'm going to make my points, and sometimes I go away after having made a video, and someone gives a constructive bit of feedback. And I go, oh, that's actually a good point.
Yeah.
You know, I'll think about that. But most of the time, I think it's better to do what you're doing. You know, you don't win a race by stopping running and going and telling the audience who don't like you to stop booing, right? You just keep focused on your thing. You run the race in front of you. And sometimes if someone from the sideline says, you should do this, that might be a good idea. But most of the time, that interaction's not overly helpful. It's just noise. So shut that out and do it regardless of the response, really. And the thing that for me matters more is does my family, pastor, and our church resonate with what I'm doing? And they do. They're very supportive. And to me, that's really helpful, actually, because I know that the people I care about actually, are backing this. And so what, Warhammer 463 says on Twitter is less important.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. So, and sometimes I say something and then occasionally someone, in person that I know actually goes, I have some thoughts, and I'll actually take those on board much more than someone in the comments section. But generally speaking, I've had a real lot of support locally from the people that I care about, and for me, that's what actually matters most.
Do you worry about those who you don't get to interact with being misled because they don't know the nuances? Because I know, when you're communicating, it's difficult. I mean, you know from preaching that when you communicate, a lot of times it is that interaction with your congregation afterwards. If there's things they don't understand, they're able to come to you. Again, you're getting an audience that grows, and so you're not able to interact with them. Is there a concern that you have for them and their discipleship and their growth?
To some extent. I mean, I think it's probably not a good idea to go to church on the internet, right? In terms of don't make someone's YouTube channel your church. So I'm trusting that people are able to use a bit of discernment, and pick, spit out the bones, chew the meat of what I'm saying if there's something I get wrong, and they've got people around them. I mean, I don't think there's been too many times that I've watched a YouTube video where it's rocked my world, right? Most of the time it's just a little bit of extra information. It's a little bit helpful. I don't want to sort of, you don't place too much importance on it. Actually, I think it's useful. It's a good space to be in, right? But it shouldn't be, and I don't think for most people in practice, it is the whole of their discipleship walk. So I think I try and keep it in the perspective of how I use other people's YouTube channels, which is I agree with some of it. Often I agree with a lot of it. Sometimes I disagree with a bit. And that's kind of okay. I don't sit and lose sleep over it. And I trust that people are hopefully mature enough to do the same with me. And if they don't like something I've said, that's fine. And if they can go to the Bible and prove me wrong, great. But yeah, so of course it would be nice if you could interact with everybody or say everything. Part of the downside of perhaps what I do is my stuff is shorter, so it allows a little bit less space for nuance. You're a little bit more dependent on generalizations, individual examples. I try and do that as well as I can, but at the same time, I don't want to make a 4-hour video on every topic. It just wouldn't be fruitful for me to do. So some guys do that and do that really, really well, by the way. I really appreciate the guys that get into all the weeds, and that's where I take a lot of my, okay, this guy's done a really good thing, let me give the Cliff Notes version. And that's good to do. So I have no problem with that, but it's not my calling. I don't feel like I have a gifting to do that. I think my thing is more about communicating concisely, and hopefully that then just brings a new audience to those ideas. That's kind of my aim.
Well, you definitely have a gift, and I appreciate your perspective on that. I love what you said about, people being able to disagree. And I think that's one of the things that, as believers, we should be the best model of people who can maybe not always agree on things that are not essentials and be able to be okay with that. And I love you really pointing that out and calling attention, because there are some people out there that really are seeking to divide and destroy. And one of your heartbeats is not that, and I'm so thankful for that you approach some hard topics, but again, pointing people to truth and to the gospel, and to go look at it for yourself, like you said, and find out what
Mhm.
the scriptures do say. Jamie, in your own personal life, you serve as a pastor, you have your family, your kids, you're in a social platform. What do you have in your life, those people who are pouring into Jamie, who are investing in you, who have made a difference maybe in the past, but are currently walking with you? Because one of the things we believe so strongly in is, who are those people around us? Who's our community? Our two or three guys that, are there for us, and that we trust to call us out when we need it, but also to bring the encouragement when we need that. So who are those people in your life, and what does that look like to keep those relationships around you?
Yeah. So I'm blessed with with great parents, and they're very wise, and that we really see eye to eye on a lot of this stuff. They're not in ministry, but they're theologically and culturally minded, and they're involved in church they serve in a bunch of different ways. So I have a lot of respect for my dad and my mum, and do run a lot of stuff by them, like all big decisions, which I think's great. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. Do I call my mummy sometimes? Yeah, sometimes I do. Yeah, of course. Like, you're weird if you don't, and she likes doing it or whatever. My dad likes doing it, right? They I think they are an excellent sounding board, and they know me as well as anybody, and so why would you not? If you've got parents that can do that, I'm really blessed by them. There's also so the senior pastor of the church that I'm at. He has been a great friend to me over the last few years. I knew him a little bit before we moved over to Cambridge. We came back and really on very short notice and without any plan, and felt led to do that. We felt that was the right thing to do. But it was a difficult season. It was one of the other options I could have got into earlier. But he was one of the people I called whenever I came back. Just felt he would be a good person to connect with, because he had actually been through something similar. And he immediately got me down to the church and said, oh, well, come and preach for us, and kept having me back and keeping the ministry thing ticking over. Created a role for me really in the church, that, I mean, I think I'm adding value, right? But there wasn't someone else doing that role. Right. So, and just on a personal level, again, it's great whenever you're dealing with things that are sort of theological, that you have people that you actually, that get where you're coming from. And we really do. I think that's part of the reason why I've enjoyed being in the church so much, is that we see eye to eye on a lot of things. And so that's a real blessing. And then there's another guy who was the pastor of the church that I grew up in. He's now older and has retired. But he's still a person who I meet every few months, sort of run some thoughts or ideas past him. He and he's great. Like, he's, if there's a thought. And a real encourager, but also, and any of those people, they're welcome, and do occasionally disagree with me. And I take what they say very seriously. Actually, when they disagree, if they go, yeah, I don't know about that, then I'm like, okay, I need to think about that further. But for me, that's good. I know they're good people. I know if they're disagreeing with me, they're disagreeing with me in a way that is for my good. And sometimes I still don't agree with them. Like, it's not like I always change my mind. But nonetheless, people like that are great. So those are kind of the ones that I really go to. And actually, another one is, we have an excellent small group. We run the most simple small group in the world. We do brunch every second Saturday with a few other families with kids at the similar age, and it's so simple. I mean, we sit and we maybe have a topic for discussion. We try and do something, but we've also all got kids running around. But it's great. We enjoy it. We end up getting to pray for each other, and really thankful for them actually as well. So there's a range there of people that mean a lot. Yeah.
Jamie, the brunch group sounds like a blast, and it really ministers to you in this season with young kids. And it's one of the things that we often talk about with our guys in groups, is like figuring out a space in a context that works for you to be able to connect with others. And relationships are key to our spiritual growth, to our overall health. And so it's super important to build those relationships and intentionally create that space for it. And I also love the people you've got in your life who are gone before you in some areas of ministry, who you're able to ask questions. And like you said, it doesn't mean you always agree with everything, but it does give you the different perspectives and make sure that you're not getting, out of line in an area of your life or not seeing something, because our hearts can deceive us into thinking that we're doing okay. And there's some area of our life that needs somebody to call us out. When I think about what you're doing in YouTube and the local church, young family, you have a lot on your plate, but I also know you're dreaming about what's ahead. So what on your YouTube channel, I know you kind of gave a vision on your channel for what you're doing this year, but you also mentioned some books. So what's next for Jamie? What are we looking for on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube?
Yeah, what's that saying? The best laid plans of mice and men, something or other, don't always happen. Basically, is whatever the end of that phrase is. Yeah, so I'd sort of thought I would do a video every other week, and try and do that. With the Super Bowl thing taking off, that sort of has been slightly altered or shifted. I've had some opportunities to do some stuff with other people, which has been nice to do in terms of collaborating. So early stages of a couple of projects, one of which could end up being a bit of a sort of media company, which I could be involved in with some guys that are doing some really cool stuff in that regard. So we'll see where that goes. Books, yeah, I've got a couple that are sort of underway, early stages. One I'm really excited about. It's all a question of time, right? But I want to do some fairy tales for boys. I think we could do some modern fairy tales. It just happened. My son got a book of fairy tales and was loving all the old ones. I was like, we could get some good ones with some good Christian themes and messages in there as well, without them all having to be, a sort of someone falls on their knees at the end and comes to faith, but just some of those virtues that Christians want to imbue into their children. So excited about that one. But yeah, we'll see. I had a nice plan, and then because things went a little bit crazy, it's kind of, I'll just go with the flow and trust that, if God opens doors, okay, we'll walk through them. But yeah, that's so I don't know if it'll look quite the way I thought it would at the start of the year. It'll probably look better. Is what's cool is that it's actually gone beyond. I was not expecting things to go as crazy as they did, and then off the back of that, for a few other doors to open up, which has been great.
Jamie, we're excited to see what's ahead. We know God has his hand on you, and it's going to be great to see what comes on your YouTube channel, and then just what God does in your life. Thank you so much for taking time to spend with us today to share a little bit of your personal story, and then also what's happening on your channel. We are so thankful for your time and look forward to hearing from you again. God bless, man.
Thank you very much. No, God bless you too.